the themes of kind of criticism towards capitalism, kind of social class stratification, these themes are kind of prevalent all over the world, I think, at the moment. So I think the general idea of a game as a metaphor for capitalist society, these abstract like themes of the show are not necessarily Korea specific, but at the same time, I think it's worth remembering that Korea is a very hyper capitalist society. So even, compared to Germany, where of course capitalism is a ruling kind of system here too, but I think even Germany, the system is a little different. And Korea, I think the word that they often use nowadays is neoliberal capitalism, where the market values have really become so integral to every part of life. So even private matters are becoming kind of working by market values and market systems. So I think that kind of criticism towards neoliberal capitalism is quite distinctly Korean. I think K-drama does at the moment have this tendency to kind of discuss or raise visibility to certain issues. So for instance, LGBT rights have been kind of growing quite a lot in Korea. And so even when you watch like a rom-com or a family drama, K-drama, you'll often find nowadays as a side character through whom the kind of writers or the writers are kind of trying to raise visibility to LGBT rights or mental health issues through side characters showing awareness to social issues is something that we see a lot more in Korean TV at the moment over the last kind of 5 years, I would say. The migrant worker that we had, Ali, was a very huge reference to a big issue in Korea that has been arising since the last kind of 15 years, where there has been discrimination against migrant workers. Similar for North Korean refugees. Korea has the biggest number of North Korean refugees, and yet it's also very well documented. And it's a social issue that they are discriminated against from the South Koreans because they kind of see them as dangerous beings. And then this, of course, fuels the situation where they can't get jobs and they do end up kind of joining gangsters and the crime world, etc. So that's also being tackled, through these characters. I think migration is a sensitive topic still, also, although it's a topic that has been around for, over 10 years now. So migrant workers have been, entering Korea for like over 20 years. And the issue first came to light, I think, in the early 2000s, where we had a lot of migrant brides. So kind of Southeast Asian women kind of marrying Korean farmers in the countryside where they couldn't find kind of brides. And this kind of issue of migrant brides first became the big issue. And then with that, the second issue that arose was their children who were mixed raced. And these children were often, underwent prejudice or racism. And this is it's a topic that's still sensitive, although it's become so prevalent. So when you go to Korea now, so many of the kind of people working in the service kind of industry, so like waitresses, are often non-Korean. And this is a huge, I think, change that's happened over the last kind of 10 years, because historically, Korea has been such an ethnically enclosed country where they had a lot of national pride on being kind of purely Korean. And there was not a lot of kind of, until kind of late 1800s, Korea was called a hermit kingdom. It didn't really do international trade. It didn't open up its borders. Its borders were forced open through Japanese colonization. And, so the colonial history, and when we think about the colonial history, obviously the response is nationalism, but that nationalism then has a tendency to be kind of ethnically centered. I think we are at a stage where I think that, invisibility within kind of popular culture is possible, right? And if you look at the way Ali was portrayed, in a way they portrayed him well, but in a way too naive, right? Too kind. Yeah, and that's also purposeful, right? That's intentional because they felt that they cannot misrepresent him because there has been a lot of racism against kind of migrant workers in Korea. This positive, I think, reinforcement is the first step. And then from there, we can turn towards realism. We can turn towards, diversification, inclusion, etc. So I think it's just inevitable at this stage. It's a comment on how little there is class mobility. So I think the problem that we see often with a lot of Korean social issues today is the fact that there is so little chance, unless you're born with a kind of silver spoon or a gold spoon in your mouth, this idea that if you are not born with money, it is very difficult to climb with just efforts alone, that we've now entered an age where those who start off with capital can enter or kind of, proliferate faster and easier than kind of others who are not. Marginalized figures exist in society. Society is an unfair place. The idea of fairness that we grow up with is not found in society. And that's kind of, I think, mirrored through the Squid Game in the show, where they say you can quit anytime. This idea of fairness is presented, but it's never actually fair. I think that's all just a parallel for society. There's that famous quote, isn't there? It's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. And I think it's similar to this show. They're saying, well, in society, I have no chance no matter what I do. So let's go to this game, new system, maybe I'll have some luck. It's this kind of, fake hope in a way. Even when we just raising visibility to a social issue in a popular kind of media work or film, TV series is enough to kind of start a conversation. And I think that's the kind of best way that, change can be implemented through culture. And, K-drama may not necessarily be able to directly lead to a policy change, but the fact that it can start conversations, raise awareness, raise visibility, raise accessibility as well. I think that kind of conversational starter is a way of it's the beginning stepping stones of social change. And just as another example, so I mentioned Parasite before, Bong Joon-ho's Parasite from last year, but after that film, I think there was an actual policy change about semi-basement homes. So I think we do see changes where sometimes that kind of popular culture's ability to raise visibility can sometimes lead to change. And even if it's not actual change, the kind of ability to get awareness and have conversation starters, I think is something.